To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast. I am your host, Ben, and I have young Ben, and I have, for right now, we're going to call her Batavia the Botanical until she changes her mind again. From the builder to the botanical to whatever it is. But we're going to talk about fall gardening mistakes. I got it out.
I accept. I'm going to say between the first day of summer through fall, I will answer to Batavia the Botanical because my building days are really in like late winter, early spring.
Right.
Leonard, add it to the calendar.
Why they all got to start with bees for?
I mean, it's catchy. Like, that's the whole deal, right? Come on now. You know how this world works.
Yeah. I just had to do it. I'm sorry. Y'all know what I just said in the messages.
Interestingly enough, in my late teens and early 20s, Batavia the beep was absolutely a reference point.
I'll beat them up. Who are they?
I am so much nicer than I was in my younger days.
It's amazing what age will do to you,
that's
isn't it?
not what we're here to talk about.
No, we're here to talk about fall gardening today. And so we started talking about it earlier. And fall gardening is one of those things where it's just like, it's not super hard, but if you don't get it right in the beginning, it's really difficult. So we want to get it right in the beginning, and we want all of you to get it right in the beginning because whether you know it or not, you are our favorite listener. So we want to help you out. But before we do, let's do one thing. If you want to support us, please check us out on Patreon, Apple subscriptions. You can get the Planter app. You can go to our Amazon store and look through all of the products we use. Check out all the links below and help us out if you can. It definitely helps keep the show on the road, and we really appreciate it. But fall gardening is I think it's a challenge, but I think it is a very comfortable time of year to be in the garden. And I say that from like you're coming out of the heat of summer in a wild garden. So getting it to go so you can have it run smoothly can be a very peaceful place to be.
I'd agree. I'd also add that it's the facade of it being difficult, right?
Yeah.
And then there are actually some difficult parts. And I also think that it's a time where you can kind of recover and even rebound.
Yeah. And can I add to that?
Yeah, of course you can. We got 6 more to go.
Yeah,
go.
That's the point of the show, is to add to it, right? I think it's also a good time to really learn about certain crops and be really prepared because, I mean, let's face it, you're going to plant the same crops again in the spring. So it's going to be really fresh in your mind how they performed and what you can get away with. So it's a very rewarding time, and much to our surprise, we've done a couple polls in the past, and there's not, at least at that time, we should probably redo it, but there's not a lot of people who have like full on fall gardens. So it's an interesting kind of concept to have, but it's a good time too because having a fall garden and a spring garden to me are a little bit different. Where a spring garden's packed to the gills. Absolutely packed. But a fall garden, in my opinion, and feel free to let us know your opinion, I don't think it has to be packed to the gills. I mean, you may be getting beds ready to rest for the winter and not want to plant them, or you can kind of work it out to your advantage. But sometimes it benefits not to have it totally filled out.
I'd agree. I think coming out of winter and getting out into spring, ideally, you want to pack in your spring plants. I think that, again, kind of most of our gardens have been dormant for, a matter of months, maybe. And I think for fall gardening, we've never officially defined what we believe, is a fall garden. I don't think we have. And I think it varies. I don't think there's a true definition. You could have a fall garden with 5 containers. You could have a fall garden with 1, garden bed, 1 in-ground bed. I don't think that the size matters. I think it's the act of continuing to grow, as we get into fall. Right. And we've said it over and over again. Planting on the first day of fall for a lot of these crops may be too late for you, right? So it's not fall is here, now let's get planting. It's more of what are we doing in our July, in our August as we approach fall.
Right, because when does this episode come out?
I think it's still in July, something like maybe late July.
Okay.
Leonard?
Yeah, Leonard.
The disappointment in my voice when I knew he was going to come up with the right answer.
Yeah, Leonard's falling behind. We'll have a full review soon. Yeah, and so I'm trying to think the best way to do this. I think the best way would to let ladies go first as usual and have you start with the first mistake you can make.
So this episode comes out something like July the 26th if we stay, July 25th if we stay on schedule, and getting your timing wrong, not starting early enough is probably the first mistake.
Timing, yeah, I agree with that. Gosh, so this could potentially take up 80% of the episode if we let it.
I was quite literally thinking the same thing. That's scary.
Because it is. We've been working together too long.
We're like some type of grafted tomato plant or something.
We're a nectarine. That's what we are.
Yeah. I love us.
And
I love us.
You know what's even worse is the people that are laughing with us are like, we're all just such nerds because we got it. If anybody else heard it, they'd be like, what? Yeah, it's awful. I'm literally a little bit embarrassed that I said that joke, but it's okay.
Wait, I listened to that episode after we recorded it, and I had the same attitude. And when I heard my response, I was like, All right, go on.
But, if you mess up your timing from the beginning, you're going to run out of time. Okay. It's a little bit different than spring because spring will, your plants can bolt. Some of them can. Some of them, will just burn up. But here, they'll just straight die when it gets too cold. But what we have to realize, too, just like with spring, but see, it's different with spring, too, because your plant's maturing when it's getting cold. So it can adjust easier than when you plant in the spring and you're putting a young plant out and shocking it with cold. So it's the same with us. You get that first hot day in the spring, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it. But you start getting these cooler days and you get refreshed and you feel it. It's the same idea with the plants. But the biggest mistake I ever made was definitely waiting until I felt it cool down to plant. That was the biggest mistake. I don't even want to throw a date out there. I mean, I'm just talking about what I felt when I was outside. Like, I'd be like, oh, okay, it's starting to feel good outside. Cool. It's too late at that point.
Yeah. In my mind, I compare spring to you're planting and that plant is growing. In my area, at least, predominantly it's getting its legs during the cool weather. Right. And then it's on the tail end of things as it heats up. For the fall garden, a lot of us are still in some pretty mild temps, mild being on the warmer side for the better part of the beginning of its life, that plant's life. And that's just not an ideal circumstance for the plant, right? But, if you time this right, it can make it through whatever that heat is and get to its sweet spot for a cool weather crop.
Yeah, I definitely think too, I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to say it. I think when it comes to the spring as well, it's into the show, gardening and everything. I believe that you could legit have another podcast only about timing in the garden and be able to produce episodes all the time on it because it's so important to get that timing right. And, you're in Chicago. I'm in coastal North Carolina. So, there's clearly huge differences in our timings and our climates. But this is where, from Jump Street, you're either going to make it or break it. And getting it timing right means you're going to have to plant when it's hot. Plain and simple. But it's counterproductive because we know that these plants don't like it hot. So we've got to make it not hot for them. We've got to force it, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because someone commented on a video, another gardener, and they commented saying, that it was a video where, I'm saying, look at my collard greens, here I am in summer. And they were like, I thought they liked cool weather. And I hopped on the comment like, absolutely they do. Like, don't confuse what's happening in my garden with what the plant really wants, right? And so in our exchange, they said, well, maybe I'll give it a try. They're in Jersey. I don't know what part, but they're in New Jersey. And my instincts were to say, wait until fall. But then the other part of me, it's like, well, you know what? Because they said, maybe I'll give it a try. Do you recommend seeds or transplants? And the interesting thing is, if you give it a try and it works, great. But you're like right on time. If we're talking now and we're recording this, which, we're a couple of weeks ahead of when this airs, gosh, that's a sweet spot to get some things started for your fall garden, And when you talk about the timing of it alone, even if you just take the U.S., 50 states could have different timing, even just slightly.
Yeah.
Right. I always think about places like even New Jersey that, all right, it's kind of similar. Yeah, but maybe not, dates and times could vary, weeks can make a difference.
I can tell you,
as we get into
I can tell you that New Jersey planning. Can get pretty hot. I spent some time in my life in upstate New York, which, anything above New York City is upstate. I was about an hour north of New York City, and I lived up there for 3 years, and it got plenty hot. I was surprised coming from North Carolina, living up there. I was shocked about how warm it could get. So now the difference is, in different areas, your seasons change differently, right? My season, for instance, is very slow to change. We will have hot weather all the way up until the last day. Like if you think about in your area, Batavia, and you have your first frost, and it's, I forget your frost date. Is it November 7th? Is that your frost date? November 1st. So if November 1st is your frost date, usually on Halloween, what is it like on Halloween?
Most times the kids have on like a jacket over their Halloween costumes.
Yeah.
But we've had the occasion get those babies some ice cubes.
But in general, there's a jacket, right?
Yeah, in general, it's cooler.
So
right?
my Halloween costume every year is to wear as little clothes as possible because it's so hot, right? I'm not saying I'm trying to be sexy and stuff, but I'm going to be a pirate this year, so I can cut my sleeves off. You know what I mean? That's kind of how we plan it out. So, and my first frost date's not far behind yours either.
Yeah. So...
But that being said, even after our first frost, we can still get up into the 80s easily after that, where some people just don't do. Like when I was in New England, once you got your first frost, that was it. It was done.
Yeah.
You didn't have, 60-degree days for a while. So, you got to take all that into account. But using the thing about fall and the timing and everything, and I'm going to try not to make it 80% of the episode, I promise everybody, is, employing shade in your garden, using shade to help you meet your goals. And your goal is to get your transplant in the ground. Doesn't matter if you started your seed or not. So on that note, if you're worried about your timing, you need to start your seeds at almost 4 months before your last frost date. I just actually... Yesterday, I started some seeds. As I get older, my eyes start to fail me more and more in dark light. So
yeah, I see you leaning back.
Yeah, don't call it out on the show. In fall, direct seed 4 months before expected fall frost date. So it's widely known that's a huge period of time. You know what I mean?
This is the key. Your frost date is a milestone, not necessarily a line in the sand when we're talking about fall crops. The key is 30 days before your first frost date first frost date, 60 days, 90 days. Look at those periods of time and how warm, how hot, how cool is your weather, right? So for me, if I go back 90 days, which puts me in August, it's the hottest time of the year. So when you talk about getting things started, if I'm outside, I need to find some shadier spot, in my garden area, right? For these things that I'm going to be, starting. When I get to September, this is where things get interesting because I need plants that have growth on them by the time we get September.
Yeah.
I should really have those things already planted, right? And for September, generally speaking, in Chicago, those things will be fine. We're not getting heat waves every day. By the time we get to October, I looked last year, and every time we get to close to the average first frost date, we're going to get a frost.
Yeah.
We don't go from like 50 degrees as a low to like 33 degrees Fahrenheit. We have been dancing with 40 degrees and maybe even, high 30s as a low temperature for a while. So you look at it to say timing, you're starting your seeds earlier. Many of you will be starting your seeds as we are listening to this episode. Where are you starting those seeds? If you're outside, you need to provide some level of shade from all of that sunny sun and the heat that comes with it.
Yes. So I actually plan my seeds right now. I plan to have them grow in the shade through the summer. That's my plan. We'll see how it goes, but that's my plan. But, adding shade cloth to your garden is truly a game changer. I mean, you're talking lowering the temperature in that garden bed if you shade it right 10, 15 degrees. You know what I mean? That's a big, big difference. Mm-hmm. So that's something to keep in mind. And so a part of the planning portion of this is picking up some shade cloth, which is very cheap. Little trick, if you buy, like you have 4x8 beds like I do, and you need for certain beds, you can buy a big sheet of it much cheaper than individual ones and cut it to size. It doesn't unravel. You're good to go. So, you can do something like that will help you. I believe there's one in the Amazon list. They keep changing. I don't know. I keep going back to them like, yeah, there's one on the Amazon list. And they're like, it's not available. But that's something that you can add as well. I just said in one of my videos, I don't usually use shade in the summertime until I put my fall plants in because it's easier to put up the structure when it's smaller plants. If you have a 7-foot plant, you're going to put up a lot more structure. And it's funny, I had somebody, for some reason, I don't understand the way it works, but I have a lot of people in Arizona that watch me on Sandy Bottom Homestead. And one person was telling me that they use telephone poles that they cut in size and put up in their garden. And then they use, because, they have to use shade cloth or else they just won't have a garden at all in the summer. And it's like, boy, oh boy, that's a sturdy surface. You know what I mean? I guess you call
telephone
them, you have to say electrical poles these days. They're not telephone poles anymore.
Okay. Yeah. Electrical, is that conduit or whatever?
No,
Batavia the Builder is
the big wood ones that you see on the side of the road. That's what they're using. Okay. Huge. But I mean, that's like the backbone of their garden. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So for us, it's not that difficult. You can make, like, I plan this year to add shade cloth on top of my low tunnels. So put my low tunnels in place, and then I can just switch out the coverings as needed. That's what my plan is as of now.
When back in the spring, if I drive by a community garden space, I am stopping at a community garden space. So it was a garden that I've never seen before. I don't know, maybe about 5 miles from my house or something, that I stopped. And remember when it was all the rage, I really wanted it in my garden space as well. When you have the big 4x4, like pieces of wood, 4 ends, and then you put like lights around it to create like kind of this. So they basically had that set up, but they had shade cloth on top, and so they had like a seating area underneath it. But they also, the person that runs the area, because I can find that person in a minute, and they're always so very kind. So this is more of not a community garden space that people have plots in, but a community garden space where they're feeding the community from what they create and so on. Anyway, that they have some of their seedlings under there as well, when they're starting, hardening off and all of that stuff. So, I have not used shade cloth for my, I don't own shade cloth, and I've been tempted by it. And I've been tempted by it because I am shading that one bed that I planted late for the spring, right? And I said to myself, do you just go ahead? I have a makeshift shade cloth. Do you go ahead and invest in the shade cloth? But then I also say to myself, are you giving yourself an excuse to be late? Like the goal is to be earlier, right? So this is the self-talk in my head, Now, I, on the other hand, have a really shady spot on my back porch, right? So there's morning sun and there's late afternoon sun for maybe 60, 90 minutes. And so in between, it's completely shaded. And that could be a good space to start fall seedlings. So if you have a space similar, that could be a good space. The only thing you have to be careful for is the sprinkling of sun and how those plants may reach for it.
Yeah, you just keep an eye on them. And that's something to, before we move on to the next mistake, is know the difference between morning sun and afternoon sun. So morning sun is cooler. Afternoon sun, especially during this talk, is much warmer, if hotter. So, like I've got my garden gets mostly afternoon sun, and it's just roasting hot. So I have to angle my shades to counteract that. So I'll let it get all the morning sun at once, but in the afternoon, I really need to shade it. Now, if you just have like a garden in a field, a lot of times you can just put that shade cloth right on top of it. If you get a lot of sun, and then it'll block that super hot midday sun, because the angle of the sun's a lot higher. And so it'll block it for those periods. But shade cloth is not a tarp. Shade cloth is a cloth that lets in a percentage of the sunlight anyways. Yeah. So don't think that that's something totally different. It's, there's a reason why we use shade cloth and not tarps, because we don't want to completely block out the sun.
You're getting a percentage, similar when we get down to using row covers on the other end of this. A percentage of the light is coming through. A percentage of whatever you're covering is shaded. Right.
So what's your next mistake?
My next mistake is probably the types of crops that you're actually planting, right? Maybe not me personally. I think I've done a fair job of saying, okay, this is a cool weather crop. I would say that I personally don't take advantage of how many different things can be planted in the fall. But yeah, making sure that you're actually starting cool weather crops.
Yeah, and also starting them at a, what's the word? Starting them in order. So you want your longer season crops to start first, working your way down. There is no reason to start lettuce 4 months ahead of time. You can start your lettuce probably 8 weeks ahead of time, maybe 12 weeks ahead of time before you want to get it in the garden. But you don't want it if we're going, let's just say we're going off of the 4 months before your last frost start date. You don't necessarily have to do all of them at once. So for instance, I started my Brussels sprouts and cabbage first, and then I'll go into my broccoli and then onions as well. And then after that, I'll wait a while, and then I'll start my kale, all my leafy greens that don't have to head up or anything. So kale, lettuce, collards, and that's it. And then I'll go into my rutabagas after that, and I'll only start them. Actually, I'll start my rutabagas at the same time because they start longer. I was thinking turnips, but I'm not growing turnips this year. I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm graduated.
Yeah. I am. I didn't grow them this spring. So heading crops is a really, really important note.
It's raining.
Yeah.
It's been 3 weeks without rain, everybody.
How many weeks?
3.
Yeah. Heading crops are a really important point because, most times we talk about other leafy greens, and you can eat those leafy greens at any point. Yeah. Right. As young Ben loves baby greens, right?
This show's about to end.
But, things that are you basically planting to get to a head, heading lettuce, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. If you're planting any of those, that takes time to produce. I'd say that those are, maybe with the exception of broccoli, those are the things that are going to go out first. So then those are things you're starting first. Broccoli is just pretty finicky.
Yeah. I am going to grow a little bit of turnips because we have those purple top turnips from our seed shop. So I want to put those in there, which if you need seeds, check us out. Link below. So yeah, definitely. I do want to grow some of those, but for the most part, I'm just going to grow rutabagas. But yeah, so there's definitely a timing for everything, and just don't go crazy all at once. That's the big thing. And my next one's going to be feeding. So we want to make sure that we're feeding our plants or fertilizing them, and you're fertilizing them heavy for multiple reasons. So one is start with a pre-planting fertilizer. And the thing with that is you're putting them in a garden that's already been used all summer. So you've got to replenish that bed. That's just the basic, it's tired at this point. You've more than likely done a spring, a summer. Now you're going into fall. And so you're going to have to be a little aggressive with it. And we need to be aggressive with it up front, because what we want to do is we want to push that plant to grow as much as possible before it starts to get cold. Because a lot of these plants can survive the cold, but only if they're at the right maturity level.
Agreed. Am I moving to my next one?
You're welcome to, or we can talk about that a little bit more because it's pretty important.
Yeah. So I think the planting after planting after planting, it's probably acknowledged as a mistake across all seasons. Right. So just because you planted in the fall and your garden bed is rested and now you're ready to plant in the spring, it's not like that soil is rejuvenated if you're not adding any kind of amendments or fertilizer. Right. It's still whatever was depleted from that soil in the fall will be depleted when you get to spring. So same idea. You still need to make sure that you're feeding that growing space. I think that sometimes seeing something that does really well in a space can be misleading. So if you have a summer plant or plantings that did really well, you kind of walk in and say, okay, yeah, let me put something else in that space, right? Thinking that next thing is going to do really well. But, well, yeah, I finished the marathon pretty strong, but I'm not ready to get geared up and run another 10 miles,
Right.
a half marathon after this marathon. I don't know, man. I'm going to need to have something replenished here. So I do think that can be a mistake that any of us can make, right, when it comes to fertilizing.
Well, yeah, and that's why, I've tried to show this the past couple years and really impress upon people that you don't have to have all of your garden beds filled at one time. So like summer, it's okay to have a garden bed empty if you have a plan for it. And so I have a plan for it. And so I'm letting that bed kind of rest for right now before I move into the next phase of it. So this spring, for instance, I did this thing where I fertilized the crap out of my broccoli. I gave it a pre-planting fertilizer, and then I came back and gave it another fertilizing about a month later. And then I was doing drip fertilizing every 2 weeks to a month, somewhere in there, all the way up. And just to put it into perspective, good thing that was as short as it was. Whatever. I got what I usually get if I plant a whole bed of broccoli. I usually get about 20% of it before it bolts. This year, I got 100% harvest off of it. Every single head came off of those plants the way that it was anticipated and it was meant to. And that was from timing, yes. But it was also because I was pushing the fertilizer to it and getting it to actually grow to the speed that it needed to grow to get it up and running. So if you take that into account, it's a big deal. You know what I mean? Because the heads were able to form bigger and faster and got me to a point to where I was like, yes, I can harvest this broccoli now. So, it's part of the game to get it in there. But at bare minimum, I would give it at least 2 to 3 fertilizations. Now, that being said, As it gets cooler, you want to kind of stay off of that, especially when you start getting into the frost scares, because you don't want the plant pushing a lot of new growth before a frost comes. So at this point, you want it to be hardening off. Our goals should be to get these plants to where they are harvestable at or a little bit after our first frost date. So we don't want to be pushing a lot of fresh growth as we get into our frost periods. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Especially for lettuce.
So my next one, it has a dotted line to timing, and it is mistaking the amount of time you have for a crop to actually mature. So you spoke about this in a recent video. I don't know, carrots. 75 days, the package says.
Bro, I don't even want to talk about carrots right now.
Don't worry, I will. So let's say the package says 75 days. I will say this until my last garden day. No one's told me this for a fact, but I truly believe that means in optimal conditions.
Oh, yeah.
As we head into fall, we don't all necessarily have optimal conditions. Right. So it's very easy. And I've shared before that I've made this mistake, looking at the package, looking at the calendar and saying, all right, great. I have even 30 days for radishes, not taking into account the amount of sun that I have that's, showering these vegetables or not, how cool the weather may be, right? Which, again, most of these vegetables like the cooler weather, but they still need that kind of giddy up to get the growth going. So I think that your example of broccoli is actually a good one, even beyond the fertilizing. Your days in the spring mean something different than your days in the fall.
Yes.
Right. And it's important to recognize that. Now, this is where, if you've never had a fall garden, this is the beginning of your documentation, right? So we're getting to you early enough in advance of a lot of your average first frost dates where you can start your planning, right? You can basically get out there and start direct sowing. If you need, you can get things started in seed sales and so on. But pay close attention to the what and the how many days you have left. And when you go back to just a couple of minutes ago, heading crops is still another good example. Don't take the number of days on the package to mean that if you have that many days of frost-free weather left, then you're golden. That's just not the case in a lot of situations.
Right. And also remember that the sun's lower, so it's going to take even more time. So you need to add time to that. My carrots right now are 115 days.
Lower, and right now you could have any number of obstructions in your garden.
Right.
For example, other plants. 115 days. Have you done any test pulls?
I've done a couple. They're not the size. It looks like it's going to be a small carrot harvest because I'm ready to pull them out.
Yeah.
How long? The insanity's got to end, right? So, it's one of those things. I will say this though, because I'm thinking about the carrots and I'm like, well, what's going in there next? And that's really important. So, what we know across the board for the most part, except for your root crops, which to get those out of the way would be turnips, rutabagas, and radishes. I think that basically, and beets, that basically covers the root crops for fall. Everything else is a leafy green, which means it needs a lot of nitrogen, which means don't be planting your cabbages and lettuces behind something that used a lot of nitrogen before, right? So, for instance, I've got a bed of corn. I don't need to be if I'm going to plant something in that bed, I need to add a lot of nitrogen back to it to make sure that it's available. Or I could plant it in my sweet potato bed, right? So once my sweet potatoes are up, I could put all of my cabbages in that bed. And then that should balance it out right. Last year, I planted some daikon radishes as a cover crop. And what ended up happening, I found out towards the end, is they actually interact with the leafy greens and inhibits their growth. And so that whole bed just didn't really function well, and I couldn't figure it out until I read that. And I was like, well, it makes sense. I kind of, crippled that bed from the beginning. So just be aware of that as you go to make your plans and put plants in the bed and stuff like that. Like, what was there first? What does it need? What is that plant's main nutrient that it needs? What is the main nutrient that you need? And then where should I put it? But then also think about what's coming in after that. Because even though you've got some time, still, and I don't think it's as crucial going from fall into spring, because you have a period of time in which you can rebuild that soil, let it rest, and do the thing it needs to do,
Yeah, I was just doing a quick search. It looks like it's about 99 days. So I'm right at 100 days from when this episode airs to my average first frost date. Mm-hmm. So I look at that and say, gosh, I'm glad we're recording this a little bit earlier. Yep. I need to get my next sowing of carrots in like now, because 99 days just may not be enough time, if I want to have fall carrots, if I'm planting them now. But we have something special for y'all that you've probably already heard that will help you along with carrots in particular.
What is that?
With a lot of crops.
What do we have special?
Oh, something special that they'll hear.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. What's your next one?
For the big one, watering. So think about this. You're going through, you've got these plants in the ground. It's hot. They don't like the heat. They like more water because they are leafy greens, and they're, you don't want a dehydrated leafy green. Mm-hmm. And they're young, so your soil is drying out faster. So you want to be watering more. So you're probably going to have to up your watering a little bit. I do a drip system in my garden, and what I've found, so right now actually I have popcorn that I just planted 6 days ago, and I have germination in 6 days. But I've been going out there every day and watering by hand that bed to make sure that the soil stays moist. And I even put mulch on top of it. So typically what I do, and I'm going to change this year, is I'll plant in the fall, and then I would let the plant get comfortable. When I see growth, I'll come back and I'll remulch. Not this year. So I'm going to drench the crap out of that bed, and then I'm going to mulch it, and then I'm going to water it again. And I'll probably go out there every day for probably about a week and make sure that there stays moisture in the ground to get that plant comfortable. Because it's going to do two things. One, obviously it's going to have water for the roots, but the other portion is it's going to have all that water that's around it will actually cool the plant as that water evaporates. It's called wetting down. It's an actual term. Look it up if you don't believe me. But it's called wetting down. And so as you do that, the humidity comes up around it, and it will actually keep that plant a little bit cooler. So what does that mean? We go back to our other mistake where we've added shade, we've added mulch, and now we're adding water. To all these things will act to cool down the garden bed. So the one thing is, if you're using mulch, use a light colored mulch because it'll reflect the sunlight. Instead of black, it will absorb it, or a dark color, not necessarily black, but a dark color. So like your leaves, your chopped leaves may not be as good of a choice as potentially others because they will have that. So just keep that in mind as you do it. I reserve my leaves for after the planting or as it gets colder and I want to add in more mulch, because there'll get to be a point where I actually won't water my garden for a month, at maybe once every 2 weeks. Probably I won't have to water my garden. So that you remulch again, put that darker color, and it warms it back up. Once you remove that shade cloth, you're good.
Are you adding mulch after you've planted? Did you say after you've transplanted things in, or direct sowing, or both?
No. Well, so as of now, I did mulch when I direct sowed, but I mulched differently, where I just took the straw and I just kind of like crumpled it in my hands. I wanted to make sure it did not clump, and that made a world of difference. I mean, like I said, 6 days and I've got germination on the corn in a drought, in the heat.
Yeah, I I think it's something I'm going to think about over the winter. And when I think about it, I'm probably just going to do it next year. But I'll give it a try this fall as well. A part of the time I spend is clearing mulch, seeding, direct seeding or direct sowing, and then waiting for things to get some growth and adding that mulch back in. That's additional work.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is you see volunteers come up no matter what they're wrapped around, right? Now, it could be 50 volunteers in your garden space and maybe only 10 come up. Right. You know, you just never know. Right. But for this fall, I'm going to do something very similar to try to combat how hot the weather is going to be when these things get planted, especially for their direct sowing. I'm going to be basically direct sowing into the soil that already has mulch on it to make sure that I can keep that soil damp enough for those plants to spring through versus that top layer of that soil could be problematic if it dries out. You know how we talk about, it only matters really if you have, dampness a couple of inches down. Well, that's not really the case when it comes to direct sowing.
Right.
So that's something to consider. Water is huge because in addition to what you're planting in or direct sowing, if you have any other crops growing, guess who's going to be the bully when it comes to, soaking up that water?
Oh, yeah.
Those bigger plants.
Yep. That's exactly why I like this monocropping that I've been doing, because I don't have to worry about that. I've eliminated that from my whole situation. So
I actually want to make that my next one. And it is carefully choosing where you're planting things for fall. Right. So this isn't the conversation that we have around plug a hole. That's not really what we're talking about here. So I have a couple of beds that will become available when things are harvested. And I am really focusing those planting spaces on my fall. To your point, I'm able to clear them, and so everything that I plant will be, it'll be net new for everything that I put in there as far as the space goes. And I think that that's going to lead to a bit more success than what I've had previously. Now, we also have to remember for my garden space and maybe some of yours, all things aren't equal when it comes to how much sun things get.
Right.
Right. So I have a space where back in the summer, well, I guess we're still in the summer. How can anyone keep this straight? So back in June, I sowed carrot seeds in that raised bed, which is barely a raised bed. It basically has one set of landscape timbers around it to frame it up in front of the front yard window. And those seeds germinated within a week. Yeah. In June. You know why? I watered that space every day, and that space is sitting. That's the garden bed where I talk about 10 o'clock. It's like, hello, sun. Yeah. So it's sitting in front of another raised bed sitting in front of it. So it's provided. There's some makeshift shade that's happening right there. That's the only reason that those seeds have germinated.
Well, probably, and the temperature is probably just right too. We're talking about that period of time where it was 90 degrees every day. Yeah, and then so you add that shade in it, and it kept it probably cooler.
It's probably it kept 80, 85, which is probably closer to when they want. Yeah.
Well, see, and that's something that we have to remember too when it comes to germinating seeds. There's if you look at cabbages, there is a optimal germination temperature that really is between the plants are best when the temperatures are average 55 to 85 degrees. And so listen to that range. But if I take that range and I think about it, I'm like, well, if I go 4 months back from when I'm going to start my seeds, that puts us right at about 85 degrees. So it makes sense. You know what I mean? To start fighting. And that's why a lot of people will want to use, heat mats and stuff like that to start their seeds in the summertime for fall. And you don't really need it because even your house is naturally warm enough, in your house in the summer is warmer than in the winter. So it's plenty warm in there to start them, so you don't really need them. And at speeds, it truly does. I think, didn't we have a disagreement about it speeding up germination time, heat? Or was that not you?
No. I mean, I may have said question mark around it. Well, but the sweet potatoes, if that was me, the sweet potatoes proved me wrong.
Okay.
You see how I'm willing to take the hit for being wrong when I'm not even sure if it was me you were talking to. That's the kind of friend I am.
Yeah, you're a damn good friend at that. There it is.
That has no effect really on measuring friendship, but I felt like I wanted some credit there. Okay, and then the final one for me. What? No, wait, real quick before you go to the final one.
You just shook your head yes.
I didn't know what that one finger meant. So
you know what this one means?
Carrots. Oh, you guys know what finger he gave me. So carrots. It's so ironic we just had that bit. I pulled up what I believe is a trusted source. It's one of the universities in the States and their extension service. Carrots, minimum temperature for germination, 40 degrees. Let me put my finger across the line to make sure I get the right. Optimum range, 65 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Maximum, 95 degrees. What did we just talk about when we backed that temperature down? So there you have it.
Yeah. Okay, so can I do mine?
You could have, there's a more smooth way you could have entered into that. No. That's a great bit of information that you shared, Batavia.
Yeah, I don't care.
You know what? I think that ties directly into the last one we're going to cover.
Oh, I hate it when you're right. You are right, because it does tie into it. Because we're talking about temperature. Just be prepared, because you've already built your low tunnel to add shade. Get plastic so you can put it on when it's time. I know it's hard to believe, but if you get plastic, you can extend your last frost date by a couple weeks almost at times, depending on where you are. And so that makes a huge difference. Just remember, if you're colder, you need a thicker piece of plastic. And if you stay warmer, you need a warmer piece of plastic. I think I'm in coastal North Carolina. I use, I believe, 3mm plastic. You use 6, right?
Yeah, I use 6. And this is what's really important. Plastic for what? Right. So for me, plastic is going over to continue to maintain the crops that have grown. Yeah. I'm not experiencing more growth once we've gotten to the point where I'm getting freezing temps.
I am.
Right. Pardon me.
Easy. You all right?
Excuse me. Yeah. So that pepperoni. So that's the exact difference, though. Right? If you're basically, we had this one dip and then things are back into, cozy tank top weather, then yeah, it absolutely serves you well when it comes to the plastic for continued growth. Plastic is a benefit for someone like me because I still have a boatload of greens and maybe even some root crops that I'm not ready to pull out of the garden yet. And guess what? That plastic may buy me time where I could still pick and choose when I want to pick those veggies, right? Versus waiting for things to thaw before I can.
Yeah, it keeps it from getting frost burned. I mean, plain and simple. And it warms it up quicker. We've talked about this before, and we're going to talk about it a lot more, don't worry. But it warms it up quicker so it can rebound. So basically, by the time you get up in the morning to go check it, the sun's already probably hitting it, and it's rebounded. You don't even realize it. And I've actually had seeds germinate under plastic before. Certain kinds of seeds, like radishes and stuff like that, I can get them to germinate if the weather cooperates, but it does make a big difference. So just get prepared. Yep. So on that note, one thing I'll say, we talked a lot about timing and a lot about like cool weather crops and stuff like that and knowing which is which. And that's when we get into, using the planter app. So, you can look and see what crops are cool weather crops on there. It tells you the temperature ranges. And then that's where you can make your designs. It's a square foot drag and drop interface, which is really pleasing to do. We live by it in our gardens, and it does make a true difference, especially when you're doing something like this and you're planning out, because if you've gone through all the steps that we've talked about, you can go through and look at each crop that's already in there, see what nutrients it really uses, which will help you grow in the first place. But in the planning portion, you can look at your next crop and go through and really design truly, I don't know how to put it. I don't want to be like overly dramatic, but it is truly a game changer as far as building a garden out and making a solid plan because your timing and your planning are what sets you up so that you can smoothly go through the season. And the one thing we know about fall is there's very little slack as far as timing and planning goes. So it's not like summer where you can be like, well, what can I drop today? You know, you basically have to get it all in, have to get it all growing and be on the road. And this will help you do that. So definitely it's got thousands of varieties, hundreds of varieties. Flowers have been added. They've got a seed box in there now, which will help you keep track of all your seeds. You can check it out. It's in the Google and Apple Play Store. That's the PLANTER app, Planter. And if you use the link below, you're going to get a nice discount from it. If you don't believe us, get the free version and check it out, because you can use it on your phone, your tablet, and the best part, for a low price, you can use it on your computer. And I say low price because I looked into other ones before I got it, and it's hard to garden when you cut off your arm. That's all I got to say. So get the Planter app. All right, you ready?
I'd like to add one more note for the Planter app, because clearly our timing of all things is a little off. You are building your garden knowledge.
Yes.
You know, as you use this app. And it's almost in a passive way, but it counts, right? Every time that you add a vegetable and you get that red dot saying that, you know, it's doesn't like whatever you're planting next to it, guess what? Go to the info and you'll see why. And that drips into your head, and those are things that you retain. So it's not just about the way that your garden is going to look when you build it. It's about those garden details that you're also picking up from that.
Yep, absolutely. So, absolutely. Okay, we have a question, and we have a good question. You ready? Natalie asked from the Backyard Gardens Community Garden, which you can join on Facebook free of charge. Please come join us. She asks, best ways to cure and store winter squashes and how to best store fall crops over the winter time so they don't go moldy.
Hey, Natalie.
Look whose timing is off now.
Yeah, I know. I'll finish it out the way we started.
This is a good one. Fall crops. So winter squashes, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, onions, garlics, all that stuff, they can all be stored and don't have to be preserved. Mm-hmm. And there is a way to store them. Do you want to pick it up or?
Yeah, I think there's always the balance of kind of, you know how you heard the saying first in, first out, like when you put something in your refrigerator. This is a little bit different, you know. So I tend to order these vegetables in the way that I believe, you know, from the veggies that are going to keep the best or on the tail end from an eating perspective. And then those that don't keep as well, I'm eating first. So I'm storing sweet potatoes much longer than I'm storing white potatoes, to be quite frank. Right. You know, so for me, everything that I try to store, I'm storing in a cool place. My basement is the coolest during these summer months after I harvest. Things are a little bit trickier when it comes to, you know, it's winter time and I'm turning my heat on, but I still have pretty good luck. So for me in my list, it would be white potatoes, garlic, onions, and then sweet potatoes and winter squash. That's the order from, you know, least viable to most viable from a storage perspective. All of them still have a pretty long storage time. I'm talking months in all cases. But, you know, you could get a half a year out of sweet potatoes if you have that much to harvest, or if you just want to kind of scatter it around. So a cooler, darker place is good for them. And, you know, just keep an eye on them. I don't stack, like, I have a lot of milk crates because, you know, I'm a collector. I don't put all of my veggies like in a milk crate and let them stack on top of each other. I let some circulation occur as I move around, you know, taking a potato here, taking a winter squash there. So yeah, that's my approach.
So first of all, I forgot that I have multiple milk crates laying around I don't have a use for anymore. I may start doing that because it is a great vessel to store stuff in. And second of all, did you know that you can go to jail for taking milk crates now?
I've heard that before, but to clarify, because I want to get off the jail topic, if I have like 10 pounds of potatoes, I'm not putting all 10 pounds of potatoes on top of each other in that milk crate, right? But if I have like winter squash, which is where Natalie started, that's a great use for them.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly. They have a little bit more weight to them. And if any people are associated with the law listening, I really don't have as many milk crates or any milk crates.
Oh, look, I'm going to say, look, if you leave it out by the trash can, I'm going to take it. That's just all there is to it. I'm sorry. But I don't need a lot of milk crates. That being said, they do have those trays now. Those like they look like milk crates, but they're trays, the big long ones. I need some of those billy goats. Yeah. I'm going to have to find a way to get some legally.
I need you to know that somehow, some way, what I'm doing here is painful. And it really was like a moment where I realized how out of shape I still am. So I'm basically, I have both arms, like one across from the other, like I'm holding a tray. And I tried to lift it up so you could see it in the camera. And it's like, oh no, your body doesn't do that anymore, girl.
Come work some bees with me. I'll get you in shape for that. That's like the position you have to be in all the time. But, in all seriousness, for me, I do it a little bit different. I'm actually changing it this year. We've used cardboard boxes in the past. They're great because they'll wick away moisture at the same time, but they're also bad because they can hold moisture. So you've kind of got to dance. The key is curing them all. So you kind of want to lay them out, let them breathe for a couple weeks, really, in a in a hot, dry place. So like your garage is a really good place. I'd love to use my shed, but I went out there at night. Dude, there's so many roaches that get in there at night. It's terrible. So I'm not leaving food in there anymore. But we typically would store them under the bed in our guest bedroom. But what we found was it was out of sight, out of mind. And so we would stop eating them. So we're trying to like tweak it. I'm working on finding a different way. But once you get them cured, they're pretty good to go if you do it right. A lot of people put them in bathrooms with heaters and stuff like that, especially those late season harvests. You know how a lot of times your winter squash will have a bunch of squash on it. You'll get them all at the end. So, that, or especially with like sweet potatoes, because they all come at once. So it's kind of hard to do. One thing that I have started doing is I have one of those foldable plastic tables. I don't know what you call them. You know what I'm talking about? They're like 5 feet long.
Like a card table?
Like a 5 foot long card table, I guess. I don't know. Okay. Like you go to church dinner and they have them all set up and stuff.
Yep.
I have one of those and I'll lay them out on that in my garage and just let them breathe. Don't let them touch. There can be a millimeter between them, but as long as that air can flow around it. And then I just I store them in, like you said, a cool, dry spot after that. And right now I have some potatoes that went green on me when I was curing them. So what I did is I just put those at the top of the stack.
Yeah.
So we'll eat those first and then we'll go through. So do the same thing. If you have anything that got more ripe than others, make sure you put those on top, because the bad thing is one goes moldy, then they all go moldy that touch it and go around it. So just be careful. But I love storage foods. I know you know that, but it's just easy. You know what I mean? And you can look in there and you can just grab it when you want it, stuff like that. We're hoping to get a bumper Seminole pumpkin harvest this year.
Oh, nice. So just real quick, and thanks, young Ben, because I absolutely skipped over the curing part of Natalie's question. So thanks for filling that gap. For the curing, I can never get the ideal conditions. Like if you look up conditions to cure sweet potatoes in, like the level of humidity and the level of heat, I can never get that. And just rest assured, if you can't, my sweet potatoes have just been fine. They've been just so delicious. So there's that. I also take advantage of, if you have a permanent structure set up for your seed starting that you're not using, even if you're starting seeds for fall, chances are you're not using the entire space. So like for my garlic, when I pulled it, I basically line it up and let it dry out, or let it dry. Same thing for onions, right? So try to repurpose some of the things that you're using for your garden purposes as well, if you don't, again, have those ideal conditions. I see, and I am jealous of all the people that have things like onions, and, other vegetables curing outside, sweet potatoes curing outside. I could never.
I just let my garlic cure outside, actually. Worked out pretty well. But sweet potatoes need 85 degrees with 90% humidity for 5 to 7 days. And so that's where a lot of people will put them in the bathroom with a space heater, take a shower, and then it'll do it. You know what I mean? That'll kind of help. It doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah. You know, but you definitely have to make an effort to get it right. So, but if you cure it right, you store it right, we're still eating sweet potatoes from last year. We're down to our last probably 5-10 pounds. So they've lasted this long. And some things store longer than others. You know, our white potatoes, we'll be out of our white potatoes. Well, maybe not this year. We'll have to try to eat them all, but we'll be out of them by Christmas. So, but that's okay. You know what I mean? We enjoy it while we have it.
Just a quick note, last year I harvested white potatoes in August and in September, and I put away, I don't know, about 6 or 8 pounds of seed potatoes using last year's harvest for this year's seed potatoes. I put them in the fridge in a brown paper bag, like that first week of December, and they were still firm. I chose the ones that were still firm and nice, and so I still had potatoes from my August and September harvest, probably mostly for my September harvest then. So, I mean, that's a pretty good go of it, I think. I don't know that I'd ever want to grow so many that it'd take me through 6 months of still eating from them. I don't know that I'd, have the space to either grow or store that many potatoes, but I've seen people do it on the interweb.
Yeah. We'll see what I do this year. I got a lot more potatoes than I had anticipated, so... I'm going to go get my milk crates and dry them out and get them ready. Boom. All right, everybody. So, you did it. You made it all the way through. Now you can cure squashes, sweet potatoes, garlic, onions, doesn't matter. You can get started and avoid the mistakes for the fall garden. Check out our seed shop. Buy yourself some seeds. Hey, look, you don't start seeds? It's a good time to learn. We got you covered. You can get Young Ben seeds or Batavia the Botanical Builders seeds, no matter what, and grow them in your garden. So everybody, remember, we're going to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.